Alright, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be doing my June wrap up and talking about all the books that I read in the month of June. So I read 14 books in the month of June, though 4 of them were unpublished books that I read for work. I work in publishing, so I can't talk about them today, which leaves me with 10 books to talk to you about. However, 2 of those were these, the official DSA theory test book and the official highway code. These are not very exciting, so I'm not going to discuss them, but I did spend a lot of time in June doing driving theory because I had my driving theory test at the end of June, and I did read both these twice, so these took up a lot of my reading time, so I felt like I should mention them, but they're not very exciting, so yes. Starting off, as always, with classics, I read 2 Victorian novels this month. One was this is He Poppinjoy by Anthony Trollope. This was my Trollope project pick for this month, so if you don't know, I'm currently doing what I'm calling the Trollope Project, where every month this year I try to read a novel by Anthony Trollope, who's one of my favourite Victorian writers. This is a really interesting one, and one that I really enjoyed, possibly one of my favourite Trollope books I've read this year, although the second half didn't quite live up to the first half. This follows a young woman called Mary who marries a man a little bit older than herself, who she doesn't know that well when they get married. She likes him, but she isn't yet in love with him, but she thinks that she can fall in love with him, which is why she marries him. And he really likes her, is a little bit in love with her, but not very in love with her. And the book follows their marriage and the relationship between their families, especially between Mary's father and George's brother. Because George is the younger brother of a marquis, and he would be due to inherit the title, and his children would be due to inherit the title because his brother is unmarried and doesn't have any children. Until just when George and Mary are about to get married, George's brother writes to him to say that he is also about to get married. And then a few months later turns up, says, actually, I've already been married for 2 years, here is my 2-year-old son, who is Lord Poppinjoy, heir to the estate. And the book kind of follows questions of legality and inheritance about whether or not this boy is a legitimate son and whether or not he is Lord Poppinjoy, and also follows the kind of messy relationship between Mary and George. I really enjoyed this, especially like the first half to 2/3, which I thought was really strong. Like, in my opinion, the thing Anthony Trollope writes best about is marriages that aren't quite working. Like, some of my favourite books by him, and some of the books that I think are the most well done, like Can You Forgive Her or He Knew He Was Right, look at marriages that just aren't quite working and what's wrong with them. And I think that's something he does wonderfully, and something that I really like, and something that is done superbly in this book. The only issue I have with it is that the last 200 pages really dragged, and a lot of the plot seemed to have been resolved, and then there was still going on. And then there was one subplot that only started in the last 200 pages and took up space and kind of felt like it didn't need to be in the book. So there were a lot of things I thought were brilliant about this, but the ending just dragged a little bit. So there were some things about this that I loved a lot, and there's a lot in it that I think is really fantastic, but there were just the 1 or 2 things that made it a kind of 4-star rather than 5-star read for me. And yeah, I would still really recommend this one. I then also read Widow Barnaby by Frances Milton Trollope, who is Anthony Trollope's mother, so I read 2 books from the Trollope family this month. I really enjoyed Widow Barnaby. I did sort of a loose buddy read of this with Kate Howe. I'm not sure if she has quite finished it yet, but we were reading it at the same time and discussing it. I hadn't really heard of this one, though I've been meaning to read something by Frances Trollope for ages, and then Kate said that she was about to read it and would I like to join her as well. So this is a very interesting novel, and this follows a woman called Mrs. Barnaby, who is the title character, and her niece Agnes Willoughby. Mrs. Barnaby is selfish, self-centred, vain, vulgar, and cruel, and Agnes is everything she is not. Agnes is elegant and ladylike and kind and selfless, and the book basically follows the relationship between Agnes and Mrs. Barnaby and both of their kind of romantic entanglements and how everything goes on from there. I really enjoyed this. It's a very early Victorian novel. I think it's from 1838 or 1839, and actually for me it reads much more like a Jane Austen book or a Frances Burney book like Evelina than it does a Victorian novel. It felt much older to me, which was quite interesting. I think it's partly because Agnes Willoughby reminded me of as a slightly more interesting Evelina from Evelina, and Mrs. Barnaby reminded me of Lady Susan from Jane Austen's Lady Susan, but much less effective and much less clever. This was a really fun read. I really enjoyed Frances Trollope's writing style. It's quite tongue-in-cheek and a bit silly, but there was a good balance of silliness and proper emotional drama and a really satisfying love story going throughout and stuff like that, which I really liked. The only thing I will say is that it takes a really long time to get started. I don't think we are introduced to Agnes Willoughby as a heroine for the first 10% of the book. It's really on Kindle, and Mrs. Barnaby doesn't become Mrs. Barnaby or become a widow for like 10% of the book either. So there's quite a lot of like introductory stuff at the beginning, but I would really recommend reading it and kind of getting past that beginning bit because it's a really fun book and one that I would highly recommend. I read a couple of books in translation this month. This is Nagasaki by Eric Frey. This is a French novel translated by Emily Boyce, and this is the book I got for my Mr. B's Reading Emporium reading subscription in June, which was a birthday present from Nick. This I really enjoyed. It was really interesting and a bit weird, but in a good way. It's set in Japan and it follows a man who lives on his own, has always lived on his own, but every now and then things move in his house slightly, or there's like 1 centimetre less of juice in the carton in the fridge, and he starts to wonder kind of what's going on, and it follows what happens from there. There are other things about this book that I really liked. It's a really, really interesting premise, and I really enjoyed the exploration of characters in here. The only thing I will say is that the ending is a little bit abrupt, and I found the ending a little bit disappointing. Like, I would have liked it to go on for like another 50 pages, but I did really enjoy it, and it is one I would recommend. That's a really interesting read. I then also read Territory of Light by Yoko Tsushima, which is translated from the Japanese by Geraldine Harcourt. This was another interesting book. In fact, I had very similar feelings about this to I did the Eric Frey novel. This follows a woman and her 3-year-old daughter after the woman's husband has left her, and it basically follows her kind of spiralling into sort of depression and loneliness, struggling with being a single parent, struggling with the fact that her husband has left her and the fact that she kind of doesn't really understand how they go on from there, and also that she doesn't kind of know how to be on her own with her daughter. And she kind of ends up drinking more than she should, not always treating her daughter in the way that she wants to, and there are some like really fond moments between her and her daughter, and there are others where she kind of really struggles to sort of cope with living with her. It's a really interesting novel. The structure is quite like episodical, and each chapter kind of deals with like a different issue to a certain extent, which in a sense meant that there wasn't like a proper narrative arc. So I found it really, really interesting, but then I found the ending, like the Eric Frey one, a little bit flat because I felt like I needed some kind of resolution or some sense of what was going to happen going forward with this woman and her daughter, but I didn't really get that much of a sense of it, so I would have liked a little bit more. I think that's possibly to do with this being like just a little bit too literary for me, to be honest, but I did still find it a really interesting book and I really loved the writing style. Then this month I also read All Is Song by Samantha Harvey. I've been meaning to read this for ages. I've read Samantha Harvey's other 3 novels, but just hadn't quite got around to this one yet. Her most recent novel, The Western Wind, has been getting quite a lot of traction lately on BookTube, which is nice, and a lot of people have been really enjoying it, so I thought it would be a nice time to finish off her backlist. This follows a man called Leonard and his brother William. After the death of their father at the beginning of the book and the breakup of Leonard's long-term relationship, he moves in with his brother William and his wife and children. William and Leonard are in their 50s. Leonard is a teacher and William has been a lecturer but now kind of runs a sort of anarchist philosophy youth club, shall we say? And he kind of teaches in an informal way his ideology to university students. William's approach to life is really like philosophical and thinking everything out and not thinking in terms of practicalities and kind of cause and effect. And this book kind of follows what happens and how his relationship with his brother Leonard changes when a young man who has been one of William's proteges does something bad, and everything kind of kicks off from there, and William and Leonard are kind of forced to question the way that William thinks about the world. The relationship between the 2 brothers in here is really, really interesting and something I've really enjoyed. It is a fairly like slow and quiet book, and it does take a little bit of time to get into the story, but I think that works quite well because it means you kind of build up the relationship between William and Leonard first. I think overall Dear Thief is my favourite Samantha Harvey, and then The Western Wind will be second, and then The Wilderness and All Is Song, both of which I really enjoy, but just not quite as much as Dear Thief and The Western Wind. Partly I think because in her 2 later novels, The Western Wind and Dear Thief, Samantha Harvey does really cool things with form, which is just something I really enjoy, and The Wilderness and this are a bit more linear. I might at some point do a video on Samantha Harvey's works because she is an author I really enjoy. I then also read The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. This is a review copy which was kindly sent to me by Quercus, who are the publishers, and I really, really enjoyed this. This was really good fun and very up my street. It follows 2 people, Tiffy and Leon. We swap back between their perspectives. Tiffy is an assistant editor in a publishing house, which of course I empathise with, and after a very bad, messy, complicated breakup, she is really struggling for money, so she ends up moving in a weird flat share with a man called Leon, who she has never met. Leon works nights, he is a hospice nurse, and Tiffy works days, so Tiffy has the house from 6 in the evening till 9 in the morning and on weekends, and Leon has the house between 9 and 6 during the day, and then spends the weekends with his girlfriend. So Tiffy and Leon live together, they share a flat and they share a bed, but they are sleeping in it at different times and they've never met each other. So they like communicate through post-it notes and get to know each other through that. It's really, really fun, this book, and really, really lovely and thoroughly enjoyable, but at the same time as being kind of all of those things and kind of having this really like nice, fun, quirky vibe to it. It also deals with some really complicated issues. Tiffany's ex-boyfriend was quite emotionally abusive towards her, and Leon's brother is in prison, and those plot lines I thought were dealt with really, really well. And all the minor characters are like really well developed as well, and there's just like so much going on in here that I really love. So yeah, this was such a fun read and one I would highly recommend. I then also listened to 2 audiobooks in June. One was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Yes, I finally read some Robin Hobb, which I really, really liked. I really loved this. I really enjoy fantasy, but it's something I don't end up picking up that often, partly because fantasy books tend to be quite long and or part of really long series, and I often feel like it's a lot to commit to. But actually listening to fantasy on audiobook is maybe a good thing to do going forward, because when I'm listening to things on audiobook I'm not like picking things off my shelf, so I feel like I read more on a whim on audiobook. And I really, really enjoyed Assassin's Apprentice. It reminded me quite a lot of The Name of the Wind, which is my favourite fantasy novel, and I feel like I'm really going to enjoy reading more Robin Hobb in the future. So Assassin's Apprentice is kind of high fantasy, and it follows a young boy from his very young childhood, from the age of about 6 into his kind of late teenage years. He is the illegitimate son of the heir to the throne and ends up kind of being brought up in the royal castle, but his father not being there and him kind of not really knowing his uncle and his grandfather and all of these relations of his who are around him, but he's not really part of the family and part of the world because he is illegitimate, but also everyone knows who he is. So he has like this weird dynamic going on there, and because he is a member of the kind of royal family, sort of, but not properly, he therefore ends up becoming sort of trained as an assassin, that sort of being a role that he as an illegitimate son can play. There are a lot of things that I really loved about this. I found the magic system quite interesting and the world building really cool, but more than anything I think just like the characterization was really, really well done. Our main character and so many of the other people around him were so like fully fledged. I really enjoyed the relationships between him and Shade and him and Burridge and him and Verity as well. I thought was really well done. Like there are so many interesting dynamics going on in here that I felt were just really well handled, and I just really enjoyed the writing style and the characters. So I'm definitely going to be reading more Robin Hobb in the future. Definitely she's a new like fantasy favourite author for me, I think, and I'm looking forward to carrying on with the Farseer trilogy and one day getting to the Live Ship Traders as well, because I hear great things about those ones too. Then finally I read The Familiars by Stacey Halls. So this is published by Zaffa, which is where I work, but I don't work on Stacey's book. But it was quite interesting to read because I've heard like so much about this book because it's been like a really big deal where I work. So from like the moment I started at Zaffa, which is the imprint where I work, like everyone was talking about The Familiars, and I've been meaning to read it for such a long time because it sounded so very up my street, and I finally managed to read it this month, and I listened to it on audiobook. The Familiars is very much up my street. It is set in early 17th century Lancashire and kind of set around the Pendle witch trials, which was a real historical event, and so several of the like names used in the book are from real historical people who did exist, even though the kind of stories around them are fictionalised. It follows a woman from the kind of landed gentry called Fleetwood. She's 17 years old, she's married, and she's in the middle of her 4th pregnancy, her previous 3 pregnancies all ending in miscarriage. Early on in the book, Fleetwood meets a slightly mysterious young woman called Alice, who she doesn't know much about, but Alice tells her that she is a midwife, and Fleetwood decides to trust her and asks Alice to help her try and keep the child and make sure that she doesn't have another miscarriage. And the book kind of follows the relationship between Alice and Fleetwood and what happens when both kind of get slightly caught up in the Pendle witch trials. It's very gothic and very feminist in all the best ways. It's really engaging, really cool, for want of a better word, and really, really good fun, and really historically interesting. Like you really feel like you are in this time, and everything feels very historically accurate. I think if you enjoyed The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, you would really enjoy The Familiars. Like there's quite a lot of crossover between them in terms of the themes and like the way they look at the world. I made a video a little while ago on this channel about historical fiction that may or may not have supernatural elements, and how one of my favourite things and my favourite kind of book to read is a historical fiction novel where there might be something supernatural going on but you're not quite sure until quite late on in the book, and The Familiars definitely fits into that category. And yeah, it's one I would highly recommend, and like I said, was very up my street. And that is all. Those are the books that I read in the month of June. Please let me know down in the comments what you read in June and what your favourite book of the month was, and also if you've read anything that I read this month and what you thought of it. I think that's all I have to say for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.